So in that conversation with him, I mentioned, oh yeah, when I was a kid, I used to play Superman with my friends. I was Superman, my friend was Lex Luthor, and he came up with a thing called kryptonite gum. And he put it in my pretend to put it in my hair. And it's like, oh, we got kryptonite gum. And Kevin Smith laughed, and I'm ready to move on, right? He wasn't. He turns, he says, he goes, wait a minute. He goes, you got that gum in his hair, kryptonite gum, man. He's got to get it out. What's he gonna do? It's like frying his brain as he's trying to come up with a solution to get that gum out of his hair. I was like, okay. I didn't go that
That's
far
true. It's
with
not
it,
like you
but
can just like
that to
cut out the
me,
hair. The hair is super solid still.
exactly. So it's frying his brain. What are you gonna do? Get peanut butter to get it out? I mean, what are you gonna do? So, but the fact that Kevin Smith took it and ran with it, I thought was great.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Men of Steel podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jmike Folson.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show.
Yes, welcome back indeed. And today we have a very special episode because we have a guest today who I've been trying to get on for a little while because it's a very cool guest with a very cool project, but it's one that I think timing got kind of weird in large part because I had a baby and things got strange. And that'll do it. But today we are joined by Ed Gross.
Hello, happy to be here.
And Ed, the reason I've wanted to get you on for a while is because you wrote, but it's a much larger project than that in terms of putting together an oral history of Superman. You put together Voices from Krypton.
Yes, which is sort of the crowning achievement, I think, of my writing, of all the books I've done.
And I was super excited about this, pardon the pun, because I was actually interviewed by you and included in the book, which is just fantastic.
Well, I was glad to have you. I love having the voices of people who spend a lot of time talking about the character. It makes sense to try to incorporate those views in. So it worked out very well.
Yeah, but then the crazy part is it's been sort of a scheduling nightmare in terms of getting this recording. And in the interim, not only did you do the unauthorized history of Superman, you have now actually done the definitive history of Superman. So that's just incredible. And I want to get to that. Let's start with your background. Like talk a little bit about how you got into doing these oral histories.
Well, I mean, I had written a number of books prior to beginning oral histories. I had done regular, narrative books incorporating quotes from people on different subjects. But then in 2015, with the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, my co-author, Mark Altman, came to me and said, hey, we should do this, try to sell this as an oral history book. And I was like, what's an oral history? I had never seen one at that time. So he recommended two, one on Live from New York, which was a Saturday Night Live oral history. And then I Want My MTV, which is an oral history of MTV. And I was blown away by the format and embraced it fully for 50-Year Mission, which was the Star Trek book, which was 2 volumes. And from there, we just started doing a bunch of these books. I mean, I wrote 14 books in 9 years, which I don't understand now looking back how that's possible, but it was. And we did oral histories on Star Trek, Battlestar, Buffy and Angel, Star Wars, John Wick, James Bond. I mean, just crazy. All the things I love in my life, all those passions, I was very lucky to be able to do it. And through it all, Voices from Krypton, I knew I wanted to do an oral history of Superman because A, the character's been a part of my life since I was about 5. It's a long time ago. And it just felt like this would sort of be the dream because I had like tons of interviews I have been doing over the last 40 years as an entertainment journalist. Every time a new Superman project came out, I was there doing interviews or retrospective interviews on like Superman the movie and things like that. Yeah, so this became sort of the dream and the real driving force of these oral histories. And that's sort of how the oral histories themselves started to come together. And if I had my way, I'd never write another book without not being an oral history because I love the format so much. But there you go. I don't
Yeah,
know if that
that's
answered
wild.
your question, but that's sort of how it came about.
No, I love it. It's wild to think of you having this sort of like being this like pack rat for all these like quotes and like interviews and so forth over your career, and then finally being able to like pull them out and like assemble them as like the beginnings of putting together the voices from Krypton. So what's your process there then? Like, so you said that you had some of this data already before you started to assemble it, but what where when you are putting together an oral history, where do you start?
It's funny. You start with an interview, whatever that interview may be, whoever it is. If it's Richard Donner, let's say, I went back to an old Richard Donner. Now, I want to emphasize my old interviews, my archived interviews, which are really a bunch of boxes with cassette tapes in them, just so you know. They started with, let's say it's Richard Donner in that instance. But my point was, there's so many new interviews that were done. The majority of these books, the book is new interviews. But you'd start with a transcript of somebody, and I'll use Donner again as the thing. You say, all right, how did Donner get involved? You do Richard Donner and you put that quote, whatever that quote is about him getting involved, and the casting process. So you break that into a couple of sections where he has different quotes until you get to Christopher Reeve. So you're mapping it out with just him, and then let's say it's the screenwriters. Let's say David Newman, and you say to David Newman, all right, talk to me about Christopher Reeve's portrayal of Superman. And then he gives me this stuff. Then you match it up with whatever Donner said or whoever has said, and you try to put together this jigsaw puzzle where you're gradually adding more quotes to a particular section, but then you start saying, okay, this has to go in another chapter, or this has to go down here. And the more interviews you do, the more you have to really just look at how the flow of the story is and make it work in the sense of you're not changing anybody, of course, but you have to make it work where one guy or one person is leading into the next person. So if Donner says, "Oh, I wanted to get Christopher Reeve because it's just so important to get an unknown in the role," then you get Ilya Salkind saying, "In the beginning we were looking for stars, name stars like Robert Redford or whoever it is, the names they threw around back then." And then you go back to Donner adding to that. And then you go back to, let's say, David Newman, and you get, press kit stuff from Christopher Reeve where you can get his voice in there too. And you're just putting it together like a jigsaw puzzle, one after the other. And as the further you go on, then things are breaking themselves into different chapters, different sections, whatever it may be. It's kind of hard to explain because a lot of these books get dismissed by people as being a bunch of random quotes thrown together where nothing could be further from the truth. I mean,
No,
it
not at
is
all.
so hard to have those transcripts all around you and say, oh, this quote should go here, and that quote should go here underneath that one, and this one over here should go here. And as you're building it, then you suddenly say, this quote has to go up here. So it's like this constant rearranging of blocks, if you will, or jigsaw puzzle pieces to make that story come together so that it's coherent when you're reading it, even though in the end, it should feel like you're in a room with 150, 200 people having a conversation about Superman. And it's everybody contributing to it, and it's telling the history of the character. I hope that makes sense. It's
It does. It makes sense to me because I've now read two. Well, two. I read the 50-year mission, which is two books. So and
yeah,
then I also read Voices from Krypton. So like I know the format and in terms of how it's laid out. And I agree with you. I think that it is you're telling the story by way of everyone's lines and recollections of things. And so you're piecing together like here's each person's memory of an event and working that together into like telling the story for that portion, and then like taking that interview and whatever sections that you sort of get to. I guess it's interesting for me because like I do have this insider knowledge because like you interviewed me, so I had the chance to and so I can see how, oh, we were talking about this thing and then we jumped over to this thing and then there was this thing that we talked about, and
right.
then there's like pieces that are like, oh, like throughout the book, so I can be like, oh, that's how you're kind of piecing it all together. Like you're allowing the conversations to flow. You're finding how you can categorize all of these interviews in those portions. I guess I'm now trying to convey this to the reader is what, or to the listener is
Yeah, no,
what I'm
please. That's a
saying.
lot clearer than I was. So, no, and that's it. Like with your quotes, for instance, that's a great example, though. You have your quote there and whatever, then you see what's surrounding you. Whoever the people surrounding you and what they're saying and how you tie into what they're saying or they're tying into what you're saying. And you just, again, it's a steady progression through 333,000 words of this book. I'll never forget that number. But and to me, it is a fascinating process because the beauty of an oral history compared to when you're telling a narrative story of the history of something is this is purely from the point of view of the people involved, the people you're speaking to. So you're going to have conflicting views. You're going to have conflicting memories. You're going to have one guy says one thing and the next person says something that could totally go opposite what they're saying. And that's what's fascinating about the oral history too, because it really is the views of the people rather than yes, you're telling the history, but unlike other books, you can have that conflicting view of what the history was.
Yeah,
And I
it's
find that
kind of like
fascinating.
gonzo journalism in that regard. Like,
Yeah, yeah, it is. But
you
it
know.
is all, thoroughly researched and spending hours and hours on the phone with people and then tying it all together somehow.
Mhm. So then, with Voices from Krypton specifically, so like, what was your process in terms of figuring out who you wanted to interview? Like, how did like I guess I'm curious. Like, you reached out to the fan community, and like when did that process begin? And then how did you go about reaching out to the fan community?
Well, I mean, it started with, I was doing a lot of interviews with people, like I say, involved in the various productions of Superman over the years, or comic book writers I knew, like Mark Waid and Philip Kennedy Johnson, and getting those guys to talk to me about their stuff. But the further I went on, and, I knew a lot of the podcasting people, yourself and Anthony Desiato and the others. I mean, so many others now that are doing these things, and just basically reaching out, look, I'm doing this history of Superman. I don't want it to be purely the people who were there. I want to get observations and views of people who have devoted parts of their life to covering this character in some form or another. Because I think it's important to have that balance of the people who produced or wrote or drew or whatever it may be, the adventures of Superman, but then have the people who are the observers, who are the historians, basically doing the interviews or talking about different aspects of the character. It just to me seemed like a smart way to go because it just presents a variety of voices. I think in the end it was 250 people that were interviewed for this book. So it's
Wow.
like a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of
I
people.
mean, I believe it. This is a tome. It's like 750 pages roughly.
Oh, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And I'd still be writing it if I didn't have a deadline. So seriously, it's like I did not want to give that book up. I said, no, it's not done yet. It has to be done. Okay, it's done. So it's crazy. Yeah, the biggest part, I mean, I don't know if I should go off on a tangent on this, but
Go.
I do excel at tangents, let me tell you. The most challenging part for me of the book really was the whole Siegel Shuster National Periodicals DC Warner Brothers aspect of this thing, of trying to find a way to tell that story where it's balanced and true. I mean, that's the thing. I wasn't like saying, but there is no hero, there is no villain. There are definitely two, I get yelled at when I say this by certain people, that there are two sides to that story of what went down with them. But that was the rabbit hole I spent literally 4 months in, I think, interviewing people, researching, grabbing court papers. I had permission from a guy named Tom I'm going to mess up his name now, but I was given permission to use his interviews with Siegel and Schuster. So I was able to get their voices in the book as well. So that was the toughest thing for me and I kept going back to it because I felt it wasn't quite right yet, telling that part of the story. That to me was that was a challenge because again, you want to get it right, but the problem is most of the people who are alive, were alive then are no longer alive.
Right.
So, you're dependent on court papers, you're dependent on people who are observing or grandchildren of people who were there and that kind of thing. So, just a tough thing, but fascinating for me to do because I was really focused on getting it right. And I think I did a pretty good job of it. We'll find out, I guess. But
I mean, I think you did a fantastic job in that regard. Like the section discussing everything with Siegel and Schuster, I was amazed at how many direct sources you got into that all. Just because it's so easy for it to be here's a bunch of like comics historians kind of like talking about it in the modern day, but it was an impressive number of people.
well, thank you. I mean, it was important to me to get it right because I'll tell you when they got their credit back and Superman the movie came out, I was 18 when that came out. I sort of created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. I don't know why, but I got like actually like a chill of excitement, and I have no idea why. And that was back when I was 18. It's like why I cared that these guys had their credit back, but I did. When that credit came on, it seemed so significant that it was there. And of course, it's been there ever since. So I think that's pretty cool. Whatever
Yeah,
went down between the two sides, that is cool that they got their credit back before they died. They were able to see their names on the big screen.
I know it, it's such a messy part of the character's backstory,
It is.
and a thing that is difficult to tackle with, because we want Superman to be this symbol of purity for a lot of us. Like, we want him to be a symbol of good without the complications of the corporate world or anything like that. But when you know that there's this difficult backstory of creative control and artistic freedom and corporate rights and all that on what was a hit that no one expected to be a hit,
Well, that's the thing. Nobody knew this was going to happen. And if DC or national periodicals didn't take it on, who knows if Superman ever would have clicked? Who knows if it ever would have happened if it didn't happen exactly when it came out? Because let's say they trying to sell it for another 2 or 3 years, though that ship could have sailed. I
Yeah,
mean, it could have very easily missed it and not been anything. Just another comic that came and went,
right.
kind of thing.
Oh man, could you imagine a world without Superman?
No. No, I can't.
But would that be a world with Wonder Man?
Maybe. Yeah, that could very well be. But yeah, it was, I mean, because like I say, when I said earlier that there were two sides to it, there really were, because these guys, the company was publishing this thing and they paid what they normally would pay. And it was, oh, she's work for hire. I mean, that's all it was. I mean, that's everything was work for hire back then. I always use the comparison to like the actors who are in Gilligan's Island. They only got paid for 5 reruns of each episode, right? And then
Mhm.
it was over for
Oh
them.
really?
Yeah. And same thing with Star Trek.
Oh,
Those Star
wow.
Trek actors, the same thing every show back then, unless you owned a piece of the show, if that was your deal. But they would get paid for 5 reruns, whatever they'd get paid. I don't even know how much it was. And these shows would go on and air for decades, millions of times around the world, and they wouldn't get another dime from it. So Siegel and Schuster had the same thing basically. They sold the rights and for that $130, but they did work for the company for 10 years before they decided to sue them. And they made the equivalent of $6 million in 9 years, actually. In the first 9 years, they made over, if you were to adjust for inflation, $6 million doing Superman. That's a lot of money. And yes, should they have gotten more? Yes. Should National Periodical and DC basically morally have given them more sooner? Yes. But by the same token, they did make money doing it and they did sell the rights, and that's an unfortunate part of it. But that doesn't take away from these poor men being destitute by the end of their life and needing something to happen to change that. I mean, so that's the other side of the thing you cannot argue against, that they should have had something more given how much money Superman made over the decades, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you did a very good job of getting all the voices that really were pushing for it. I mean, I think it was like, for example, like a great section on like Neil Adams' support for them in it all,
Yeah,
like and really conveyed like how much like this person like really rode for them, how much he you'll he caped for them in that
that's
situation.
right. He did. He really did. It's no, it's an astounding piece of the history. It really is. And their story weaves in and out of the history, because Jerry comes back to work for DC again in the late 50s and early 60s. He's working there until he decides to sue again, and then he gets fired again, and that's the end of it until the Neil Adams situation. So it's interesting how it weaves in and out of the history as the history is progressing.
Yeah, and of course there's that whole period where DC wasn't even allowed to say Schuster and Siegel.
Oh yeah, people didn't even know who they
Yeah,
were at a certain point. Once you get to the 70s and stuff, people didn't even know who Siegel and Schuster were. Neil Adams did, but a lot of people didn't because their names had been stripped from everything. So that's why I say I think it's great that they got it back. And you watch Superman and Lois, you watch My Adventures with Superman, whatever it is, there it is. Characters created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster.
yeah.
That's wonderful. So
Yeah, it's kind of a happy ending. It's nice that some of those are not, you know, horrible story. It's like
well,
it would have
yeah.
been better if it happened earlier in their lives, but yeah,
Exactly. But they didn't die not being recognized for who they were. And I think that's important that they got the recognition finally as the creators of this character that has, been alive I mean, I say this all the time, but it's true. Since 1938, there's not been a decade without some form of Superman in production. That's insane.
Mm.
It started with the radio show in 1940. Here we are in getting ready for 2025, and the new Superman movie is coming out. I mean,
Hmm.
that's crazy to me that something could be in some form of production for every single decade. Not saying every year, but every decade since that character was created. So whether it's Broadway or cartoons or whatever.
Yeah, it's been an enduring legacy of on the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
On that note, was there so what was the first thing that you discovered in doing this research that surprised you the most? Like I'm sure you came into it with your preconceived notions of what the story of Superman was. And then, what was the first like zinger that you encountered?
Well, I think it was, again, I hate to harp on it, but the whole Siegel Schuster thing. I didn't know that much about it going in. I really didn't. And those were the zingers for me because like learning the ins and outs of it and really looking at like, letters back and forth. I was going to say emails, but that didn't exist. Uh, letters back and forth between DC or National Periodicals and Jerry Siegel and all that stuff. So that to me was fascinating. And then talking to people who really studied that stuff, those papers, those court cases, and getting their views of what went on. That to me was the most shocking thing. Everything else, I mean, I have to be honest, I had a pretty good knowledge of the history of the character, so there wasn't a lot of that way that was going to shock me. In terms of the production and stuff, the comic history, all of that stuff was pretty straightforward to me. It
Okay.
was those sort of digging deeper into those things like Siegel and Schuster and speaking to people about that whole situation. That's the thing that really was like the shock for me. Those, I don't know, if shock's the right word, but a very surprising learning as much as I did about it. And whereas the rest of the history, like I say, I had a pretty good working knowledge of it, basically. So nothing really blew me away per se that way.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, for example, like I I recently finished the book, and when I was reading through the section on the making of the movies, I was just like chuckling to myself as we get into anyone discussing just like how corrupt by this behind the scenes the Salkins were, because
Oh, there's that.
yeah,
Yeah. And what's funny is like, because I had interviewed Donner prior to ever starting this book. I mean, I'm talking back in the 80s, I interviewed Richard Donner. And so he told me a lot of this stuff about the Salkinds. And of course, once you dig a little deeper and you get corroboration from other people talking about what the situation was like with them, that you have a Salkind clause in contracts
right.
because saying how many movies an actor is making because of what they did with shooting the Three Musketeers, and saying let's make two movies out of it. And then now after that, now every movie has I think they call it the Salkind
They do,
clause.
yeah.
Yeah. So that to me is, yeah, so that's quite a story there. But again, I knew a lot of
Yeah.
it. As a quick tangent, my introduction to Donner was I was supposed to go into Manhattan. I was living on Long Island. I was supposed to go to Manhattan, interview him for Lethal Weapon back in '87. And I got like this huge fever and I couldn't go in. So I called the publicist and said, I'm so very sorry I can't make it in. And I'm sitting there in my little basement apartment. Also, my phone rings. And Richard Donner has that deep voice,
Mhm.
and he goes, is this Ed Gross? Yes. He goes, this is Dr. Donner. I understand you're under the weather right now. So why don't we just talk on the phone? I was like, okay, we did. And that just started a whole like level of communication where I could keep reaching out to Dick whenever I needed to. So
That's amazing.
it was funny, but Dr.
Wow.
Donner, I never forgot that 1987. And you get this booming voice just saying, it's Dr. Donner. That's great. I love that memory.
Oh, that is so cool. It's amazing that you had these resources to draw on in the first place. Like I can't even imagine like getting started without having like like you said, like 40 years of interviewing people.
Yeah, I mean, I've Al Goff and Miles Miller for Smallville, back at the beginning of Smallville. I mean, I spoke to them again for the book, but in the beginning, I think was the first interview with Al about Smallville. And I was stupid enough to say to him
Really?
that, yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was one of the, if not the first, definitely one of the first couple that interviewed him. And I just remember back then, and I listened to the audio of it, it's still there. I was stupid enough to say, how are you doing a TV show, a Superman show without Superman? I don't see how that's going to work. 10 years later. Uh, you know, how stupid do I look? But the nice thing is I can go back to these guys, you know, a decade, 2 decades later and say, hey, I'm doing this book. You mind taking some time to talk to me? And they usually make the time. Everybody said yes, except for one person, but everybody said yes. And
I'm assuming you can't say.
I mean, I could say it. He said no, but John Byrne
Oh,
didn't
okay.
want to do it. He's
Yeah.
politely turned me down, by the way, but he's the one person I reached out to that I couldn't get. So, you know, okay, sorry.
So, what era of Superman would you say that you were most excited to sort of explore? Because I figure you probably did deep dives into sections at a time, and so what era of Superman were you like? Ooh, I can't wait to like jump into this, or did you just go through different phases of being like, oh, I'm in the George Reeve phase right now, or like, oh, I'm doing the Christopher Reeve phase right now?
It really wasn't. I mean, the funny thing is, with a book like this, you can't really worry about the phases, like saying, "Oh, I'm doing Christopher Reeve, George," because these interviews are coming like at different times, different people. It's not like you're finishing one section, it's like, "Okay, now I'm going to do interviews on such and such." So you're constantly getting like new interviews. So your brain doesn't get to say, "I'm just focused on Christopher Reeve right now," until you're ready to really sit down and write that chapter. But by that point, all the interviews are done. You know what I mean? Or most
Mhm.
of them are done. You just add to them as they go on. So that's sort of the the approach of the thing. But that being said, I will say the two eras that I was excited about were the Christopher Reeve movies that dig deeper into those because Christopher Reeve's, as they say, who's your favorite? Well, if I have to pick a favorite, Christopher Reeve is my
I mean,
favorite
he
of
is the
all of them.
central character on the cover of the book.
I mean, yeah, I mean, right, exactly.
Just,
And he is. And I always say, and it's already become a cliche with me that I follow the S. So it's just like, there it is. Yeah, I go with wherever the Superman is. Whoever's playing Superman, I go with him. I mean, I get very excited just the fact that there's a Superman adventure to watch. I don't really worry myself with who's making it or who's filming, I mean, who's starring in it. You do it. So the Reeve thing, though, was just fun to dig into thing because it's so important to me, I think. The George Reeves section was very important to me because that was my first impression of Superman as a 5-year-old was watching reruns of The Adventures of Superman. So that was really important to me. The 90s was also that whole period of the Nicolas Cage, Tim Burton, all that stuff before and after them. I had done some interviews when I used to be with Cinescape magazine, and I would speak to Jonathan Lemkin, the screenwriter that was on at that time, and be fascinated by what they were trying to do, hoping they wouldn't get to do it in some ways because of the whole Tim Burton, Nicolas Cage thing because it's just going to be so different from anything that had come before. So that was a fascinating period for me. But the real excitement, I think, was just all told telling this story, bringing this story from the beginning before there was a Superman to where we were at that point when I finished the book, because obviously the history's still unfolding, so you can only go up to a certain point. But Superman and Lois is in the book. The Snyderverse stuff is in the book. I got Zack Snyder. Well, that was later for the second book for an hour. But the point is, so it's, to me, the excitement was just knowing that I was telling this story in a way that I felt had never been told before. At least that was my driving thing. My thought, approach was that nobody had quite done a book like this. Nobody had certainly done an oral history, but that was the exciting for me. So it wasn't a particular period. It was just knowing that I was going to go from the beginning to the end, or as much as the end was, by deadline time,
right.
basically. That was the thrill for me, is knowing I was just telling this story that I've been dreaming of telling, and having the opportunity to do it and having all the cooperation of all these different people that allowed me to do it. So if that's where I really say, if you were excited about anything, that was it. Just telling the whole story.
I guess on that note, what was your media diet while you were working on this? Were you watching a lot of Superman stuff, or was it just this is your work mode, and then when you're off, you're just enjoying whatever else like kind of things that you would like pay attention to?
Well, I try, the problem with this is like my work thing too. Like, I work for a couple of websites as my day job. I'm an editor on them. And my problem is I have the TV on all the time, but I can't watch something unless it's news. I can't watch something I haven't seen already because then it distracts me and I have to, I have to like I keep stopping and
He's just
rewinding
like
and oh
me.
my God, it's terrible. I can't watch. So when people say, "Hey, did you watch this show?" Yes, like no, I can't because I'm working all the time and I can't really fit it in. But I would put on a lot of Superman stuff. I mean, the funniest thing is when I finished Voices from Krypton and I finished Superman: The Definitive History both times, people would say to me, "You never want to hear the name Superman again, right?" And I was just like, "No." As soon as I finished the books, the first thing I did on both cases was just blast that John Williams theme like as loud as my, my sound
Awesome.
system would go, and like ready to go again. I'm ready to write some more on Superman now. I'm just trying to figure out how I'm doing or what I'm doing, but I'm ready to do more. I can't stop. It's an illness. Which it is. What can I tell you? But yeah, look. But the thing is, and this is important for people to know too. it's not just Superman with me. It's Star Trek, it's the Beatles, it's James Bond. But Superman's the biggest of them all for me. But there are all these obsessions that I got when I was a little kid. It's like a 5 year period in my life as a kid where I can say I was formed in those 5 years and it never changed because those things are the things I fell in love with then. Superman, Star Trek, Beatles, Dark Shadows, Planet of the Apes, the Universal monster movies, whatever it is. And here I am, you know, all these years later and have written books on most of those things. So the fascinations never went away.
Yeah, I did want to like at some point like cover that because you are living the life that like I kind of dream about because you're doing like all these like oral history books about all the topics that I freaking love. Like
Right. Well, that's the thing. It's look, there aren't a lot of people who get to say they love what they do. And I have been very blessed to say that for 40 years, I have gotten up every day able to do what I want to do, which is do interviews, write about stuff. Like right now, I focus on classic TV for womensworld.com and firstforwomen.com. I'm their senior entertainment editor. And every day is like getting in front of this. Okay, who am I going to write about today? I'll, pick a TV show, pick a star and do a profile, that sort of thing. And with all the stuff that I fell in love with in the 60s, I always say that my wife and I debate this. They say you're a child of like the decade after you were born. You're a child of that decade because it really formed you,
Mhm.
basically. Well, I was born in 1960, and I can look at 1967 to 1972, where I was in this apartment in Brooklyn with my family, and I met new friends that became my best friends and stuff, and we were all into the same stuff. So all the things that I love now were formed then. I fell in love with those things then. Superman when I was 5. Then we moved to this place. Like I said, it was Dark Shadows or The Odd Couple came out in 1968. How what 10 or 8-year-old falls in love with The Odd Couple? But I did at the movie. I mean, I loved it and it never went away. And so all those things that were there, a lot of them are still coming back in new forms. So they never really went away. So, Star Trek, the J.J. Abrams verse, Kelvin universe, whatever they want to call it, Planet of the Apes in these new versions, and of course Superman. I mean, and James Bond, and these things just keep going. So all these things I fell in love with as a child have followed me and gradually become a career. And that's pretty cool. Or I'm very excited about that because it means the world to me that I've been able to do this.
One of the things that's awesome about that is you get to talk to people who are like just like super enthusiastic about these very like niche topics or niche isn't the right term, nerd topics
Right.
like that, yeah,
Absolutely.
like there's lots of people who love this stuff. So I guess here's a question: who stands out as the most surprising interview that you were able to get in all of these, like not just the Superman book, just in general, like who that was like excited to talk to you about a thing that you just never thought you would actually get to.
Boy, I mean, I hate to lump a bunch into one thing, but I'm very friendly with Ron Moore, who created Battlestar Galactica, the
Hmm.
remake of Battlestar Galactica. Where the exciting I didn't expect to get at all is Ron, first of all, spent like 14 hours total on the phone with me talking about Battlestar Galactica.
Oh
I mean,
wow.
it's just crazy, right? But he did the same thing when I was talking to him about Star Trek. His view was, and a lot of these guys' views, and this is the nice thing. Nobody's saying I'm giving you 15 minutes, so you better make it count because that's all you're getting. Almost everybody's attitude was, we'll do this until you get what you need. And that's astounding. And then I pointed out Ron Moore because with the Galactica book, he sent an email out to the entire cast and crew, said, I'm cooperating with Ed Gross and Mark Altman on this oral history of Battlestar Galactica. If it's something you want to do, I would appreciate you cooperating with them. Everybody said yes. We got the entire cast and crew of Battlestar Galactica. That was unexpected to me because you said, don't limit it to voices from Krypton. The fact that we got everybody and everybody was so enthusiastic to talk about this project just made that book. I mean, it was just amazing. And I never expected to have everybody say yes and everybody be willing to spend as much time talking about it as they did.
That is amazing.
That's awesome.
Again, another one of these nerd topics that I freaking love, and I'm so jealous that you. I mean, like I'm grateful that I get to read the book.
Right.
I
Yeah.
guess the bigger point. Jealous that it gets to be your profession.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, like I said, I've been lucky. I'm not rich, but I'm happy. You know, my wife, I have three sons, and my wife and I, and we've been together for 37 years. We've managed to get by on this career and her, what she does too. So, and that's a wonderful thing that, again, yeah, I don't want to put too fine a point on because it sounds like, well, all right, now he's bragging. I'm not bragging at all. I'm actually expressing real, genuine gratitude that I've been able to do this, and people have seen fit to hire me to do these things, be an editor on a magazine or website, whatever it is, and write these books. It's just incredible.
So let's pivot now to the new book, which is coming out not Tuesday after we're recording this, but by the time this episode drops, it will be out for months. Just so that we're
There
upfront
you
about
go.
that part. Superman: The Definitive History. So how does that come about? Because you've already done Voices from Krypton. Where is that process like coming?
Well, I got approached because I think because of voice, I mean, I was told it was because of Voices from Krypton. They also had a very limited time initially when we were doing this book. I was told we had a deadline of like 4 months, which was insane to try to do. And it became a lot longer than that. So, it started off at 4 months. That was not just because of me, but because of production issues and everything else, trying to pull together that book, which we can talk about in a minute, sort of what went into it. So I was approached by them. And I think because of the fact I had done voices and they knew I had, sort of a ground floor of research done and interviews that were done. But then I ended up doing just like it was with Voices from Krypton. I started with a ground floor of my own interviews and then had to do a ton more. The same thing happened here. It's like I started with interviews I had, but the book was approached very differently. So you needed the voices to be different and to say different things. And I was able to go back to a lot of those people and say, hey, you want to do another one? You want to, yes, I'm doing another book. Somehow I'm doing another Superman book. That's sort of how it started. And then it was just, again, it became a very fun process of pulling it together. I co-wrote the book with Bob Greenberger, and I did that. I mean, and Bob says this too, so it's not like I'm telling anything out of school here. It's that we reached a point where I was looking at what they wanted from me for the content of the book. And when it came to the comic book history, they were looking for a kind of minutia that, given the original deadline, I never would have been able to give them because I know the history of the comic, but I don't know it the way I know the production elements of Superman, the various versions of him in different media. And so they contacted Bob and they got Bob in to do the comics section, which he did a phenomenal job on. I mean, it really captures the entire history of that character in comic form. So between the two of us, and I needed a lot of like this, there's like features, I guess, or 4-page, inserts, whatever, of different aspects of Superman, like Smallville, and talk about Metropolis and whatever it may be. And it just worked out that that's how that started. And then it was just that once well, we hit the ground running, though. I mean, this book, like I said, initially only had a few months deadline, so we were writing very quickly to it. But this book is more in the narrative form that I used to be used to writing books in before I fell in love with oral histories and became obsessed with them. So it was fun exercising that old muscle again, that I hadn't done in 10 years, 15 years in terms of a book.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was so amazed when I saw that you had the new book coming out because, I mean,
So
Voices
was
from
I.
Krypton just, I'm sorry that you had to go through a degree of crunch in that regard. Like that's a thing that people, generally are opposed to. But I am glad that it did give you the chance to flex those muscles and to put out a more traditional sort of journalistic production.
And it was, but the beauty of this one is, I mean, here's the difference between official and unofficial, ladies and gentlemen. Unofficial has no photos because, you don't have the rights to them. You can't use them. It has few illustrations, but they're done more in caricature form than anything else. I may have a couple of comic book covers, which is legal. You get to the official book, though, the Superman, the Definitive History. And this thing is loaded with incredible art. I mean, I'm talking comic art, production art, pre-production art, storyboards, advertisements, everything from this character's history is there. I mean, and the size of the thing is huge. It weighs about 16 pounds, I was told. Oh, it's
Holy
ridiculous.
crap.
I pick it up. It's got to be more than 60 because I don't think I'm that weak when I pick it up and I have to go, oh, that's, that's heavy. And moving it, like I moved it for the other day from one room to another, and it was really heavy doing so. But it's oversized and it is just loaded with incredible art. And that's exciting to be involved with that book and seeing it again, that story told in a way visually that it's never been able to be told before. That's exciting. So
Yeah, I guess that makes sense because when we were talking about this, I did look it up on Amazon. I was like, well, I'm going to pre-order the Kindle version, which is like 20 something bucks.
Yeah.
How much is the physical copy? Oh, it's like 150. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, man, I know that sounds crazy, and they definitely did it for like, I think more of the collector's market, this version of it. There will be another
Oh, it's
version
on my
down the road.
Elfster. Like I fully intend for like one of my parents to like get that for me for like holidays.
Cool. As well you should. And that's the thing. I got one copy. That's all I'm getting is one copy. That's how expensive the book is to produce. So as an author, I got one. Usually I'm used to getting like 10 copies of books I write, initially.
Mhm.
And then you can get the rest, discount price. Okay, great. This was one copy, and right now that's all I'm getting. So that just shows you how expensive it was to produce this book, because the retail is 175. Amazon's got it, I think, I know. Believe me, when I heard that, I was like, how many books do you think you're selling at 175? But apparently they're selling them.
Yep.
And it's worth it. I mean, really, if you have the money to buy it, it is worth it. And Amazon's got it for like 157, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, it's on sale
And
right
the
now.
Kindle, like you said, though, is like 19.99. So, that might be the way a lot of people go. I don't know. But yeah, so that's I kind of got lost there. But I think it's but that's sort of the big difference with this book.
Mike, I've been asking most of the questions. What do you have anything?
Well, I was gonna say, like, did he have a favorite? Did he have a favorite Superman that he interviewed or he'd like to talk to the most? Because I'm looking forward for the first book is by Brandon Routh. So I was like,
And he wrote the
ooh,
introduction to the second book too, which was kind of cool. And said
how cool
something.
is he?
He's great. I mean, Brandon is I've gotten to know him a little bit, and we've spoken a number of times, and through the years, and then when the books came up, then we did Zoom conversations for both books. And he's great because what I like about him so much is that I'm not saying he walks around pretending to be Superman in terms of embodying the principles of Superman, but if you watch him on stage, you talk to him one on one, he just conveys the powerful messages of the character, of inspiring people, of trying to reach people, of just being real and looking at what that character represents. And I really do believe he was touched by what Superman represents to so many people, and he tries to convey that to others. I mean, I saw him interacting at Superman Celebration last year. There's a handicapped kid and he was there, crouched down, talking to this kid and making that kid's day. I mean, I watched this kid light up as he interacted with him, and it was just wonderful to see. And that's how he is with people. He doesn't,
So cool.
you do not feel that he is putting on an act, that this is something he genuinely feels, and it's wonderful. It's really wonderful to see.
That's so
That's
cool.
awesome. Because like within like the culture zeitgeist of the Superman movies, it feels like his movie is kind of like forgotten about sometimes. So it's cool to see like him actually like portraying that character out in the open and actually like seeing what it means to be Superman to everybody who wants it.
Oh, no, and also getting the chance to reprise the characters he did in Crisis at Infinite Earths.
Yeah.
To him, that was like
Mhm.
going back in a way, and it closed the doors, so to speak, for him personally. That it wasn't unfinished business with Superman when he got to do it again, and it meant the world to him to do it again. And the reaction. Look at the reaction. You say, I mean, your point is valid about Superman Returns kind of getting forgotten, but look at the response he got as Superman. So obviously people
Yeah.
remembered
Mhm.
because people were so excited about seeing him back in the role, And again, John Williams theme playing, he's there in the costume with Tyler Hoechlin as Superman. It's just an awesome, fanboy moment, right? It's like, oh my God, he's back.
That's so
When he
cool.
says, what's the line he says in the thing? He goes, oh, it's not the first time I've gone crazy and fought myself,
Right.
which is beautiful, tying to Superman 3, which wasn't him, but it didn't matter. It's the same Superman. So it was just cool. And watching it was just a thrill, and then getting to talk to him about it was just even better. So there you
Okay, I'm done
go.
geeking out.
I mean, I've spoken to a number of the Supermen, but not, certainly Christopher Reeve I'd never spoke to before he passed away, unfortunately. But I spoke to Dean Cain. I spoke to many of the voice actors who have played Superman.
Have you talked to George Newbern?
I have, yeah. Tim Daly, George Newbern, all these guys I was able to speak to, and that was exciting.
Superman of my
You know,
childhood.
and Henry Cavill, my first exposure to Henry Cavill was he was making a movie called Legends, and I was one of like 30 journalists who have been flown to the set, and we're in a trailer interviewing him, and he comes in, and I'm sitting there, and this is where I know I am still such a geek. It doesn't matter. Again, this is before Man of Steel, and he comes into the trailer, and he's got armor on, and he's looking really buffed up, and his hair is black, and he happens to have a curl coming down on his head. And as he's talking to us, I'm staring at this guy, thinking to myself, like a little kid, saying, "It's Superman." I mean, it was this feeling that I was looking at Superman the way he looked. I mean, there had been rumors and stuff that he might be approached, but then to see him in Man of Steel, and know that he was cast in it and see the movie, and I got to interview him for that too, is just amazing because I thought he was a great Superman. I'm not saying all his material was perfect for him, but it certainly he was a great Superman. He really played
Yeah.
that character well. So it's just very cool to know that I've spoken to a number of the actors who have played him. So that was pretty cool for me.
Yeah.
Pretty freaking cool.
Living the life, man. Living the life.
It's just fun. I mean, it really is. I still enjoy, every time I do one of these interviews, I'm thrilled.
So, Ed, what is next for you right now? Like, you've got this book coming out in 2 days from when we're recording this, but again, months in the past from when this is actually coming out. But what else have you got on the horizon?
I mean, right now I'm trying to get a few other book projects going. There's one for Inside Editions that I can't talk about in terms of specifics, but the one that looks good, and it'll be another one of my favorite. Nothing I've mentioned tonight, actually, but it's another one of my favorite things movie-wise. And if I get the chance to write the official story of it, that'll be another like dream come true to do that. I'm finishing up volume 2 of An Oral History of Planet of the Apes, which I've co-written. Volume 1's out now, has been out for a few months. I was supposed to have this one done already. It's not, but it's almost done. So I've got the second volume of The Planet of the Apes and a few other things. And yes, I am dabbling in some Superman stuff. Again, can't really talk about it because it's not solid enough yet. But I am looking at doing more writing about Superman because it is an illness, as I said earlier, and I have no cure. So
that kryptonite poisoning.
Just keep writing about it. Whatever you want to call it, it's there. And one thing I do want to mention about this is the fact that every person I interviewed, and it was the same, like I was saying earlier about the Galactica cast being so into it. The beauty of the Superman books of everybody I interviewed, there was not a single person that didn't want to talk about the character. Not saying or their experience with the character, not saying that everything was roses, when they did their thing, but it didn't matter. They were so enthusiastic about talking about the character and talking about the history that they were a part of, basically. I mean, I did an interview with Kevin Smith this was back when Man of Steel came out. He'd done a promotional thing as how does he shave for Gillette? It was like, how does he shave his beard, right? So in that conversation with him, I mentioned, oh yeah, when I was a kid, I used to play Superman with my friends. I was Superman, my friend was Lex Luthor, and he came up with a thing called kryptonite gum. And he pretended to put it in my hair. And it's like, oh, he got kryptonite gum. And Kevin Smith laughed, and I'm ready to move on, right? He wasn't. He turns, he says, he goes, wait a minute. He goes, you got that gum in his hair, kryptonite gum, man. He's got to get it out. What's he going to do? It's like frying his brain as he's trying to come up with a solution to get that gum out of his hair. I was like, okay. I didn't go that
That's
far.
True. It's not like you can just cut out the hair. The hair is super solid still.
Exactly. So it's frying his brain. What are you going to do? Get peanut butter to get it out? I mean, what are you going to do? But the fact that Kevin Smith took it and ran with it, I thought was great. And it was just, again, that enthusiasm, right? That fanboy enthusiasm. But everybody had that. And that was incredible. That I never expected. I figured some people were like, yeah, I was involved with Superman, whatever. But no, everybody was so excited to be a part of this character's legacy.
Yeah, you can really tell when reading the book that there's so many people contributing. Obviously not the canned interviews that are from the past, but like the people who you speak to that are more modern. Like there's so much enthusiasm coming through about the character.
Yeah, and that was across the board. I mean, I'm telling you, there was not one person I spoke to for either book that made it sound like I was pulling them through hell trying to get them to talk about their experience. It was all so enthusiastic because I do think they recognize, again, keep using the word legacy, but it is the character's legacy to be a part of it. I always say that to people. It's like, you played even the small part, but you are forever now linked. It's like George Lazenby playing James Bond in one movie. right? But he's part of the James Bond history. He always will be. And it's the same thing with each one of these people who have worked in some capacity on Superman. They are a part of that legacy that will now has gone on 86 years and looks like it's still going to go for a long time, hopefully.
Well, Ed, gotta tell you, I love Voices from Krypton. I'm so excited for Superman: the Definitive History. Where can people find you and follow you to find out about all the projects you've got going on?
Well, I've got edgrosswriter.com. I mean, that's my website, basically my blog. I'm on Facebook. I'm now on Blue Sky. I'm just starting to build that one. It's like, oh, I've got, 25 followers. That's great. For this new thing that I just joined. So, but yeah, so those are the places I'm at. And like I said earlier, I am constantly writing about classic TV on womensworld.com and firstforwomen.com. That's sort of my current gig that my day job, so to speak. Yeah, so I'm still out there. I mean, somehow after all these years of doing this, I'm still out there, which is mind-blowing to me, but I'm there.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for coming on, and it was a delight chatting with you both for the book, but then to have you come back on for today. Really great. I hope we can get you on again to talk maybe about a Superman story or something else that you just want to chat
Sure.
about sometime, because
Absolutely.
you've got such a wealth of insider knowledge and perspective on all this.
I'd love to be back. Just let me know.
Yeah. Jmike, where can people find you and follow you?
I have officially switched over to Blue Sky, so you can find me at j5.bluesky. Whatever the rest of that part is. I'm slowly integrating. It's a pretty cool party over there so far, and I'm having a blast.
As am I. You can also find me on the Blue Ski at Case Aiken. It's a good time over there. I've a lot of comics Twitter has migrated that way, so it's a great time at the moment. Should check that out. Should also check out our Discord server for certain POV. You can find a link in the description of our episodes or all over the internet. Like we try to post that everywhere. Come join and interact with us directly. We don't bite. We're rather quite nice, and I really enjoy the conversations that we have going on there. On that note, we a while back announced that we were going to be doing a giveaway for copies of Ed's book when he finally came on, and I have to admit, I lost all of the people who submitted at the time. Because this was months ago, and I'm very certain that I was dad-brained out like crazy at the time. So here's the deal. I've got 3 copies that I'm giving away. If the first 3 people to DM me on Discord will get those copies. So there you go. I'm sorry that we're restarting the contest, but I just can't find I know people message me, but I just cannot find the info, and it wasn't that many. So we're just going to do it that way. But yeah, so Discord, it's a fun place. Meanwhile, you should check out some of the other shows on our network. I am going to plug my own show at the moment because Ed just was talking about Planet of the Apes, and that makes me think about how I did a 5-part Planet of the Apes retrospective looking at the original series over on Another Pass, which is a movie analysis show where my co-host Sam Alisea and I look at movies from the perspective of when they were created and discuss what could have been done to make it a tighter movie, or in the case of every 5 episodes, we look at how through creativity people overcame the adversity of the production to basically create a proof of concept of what the main show is about. So check that out. It's a really fun show that I've been doing for 170 some episodes at this point. So it's a really good time there as well. And if you've been listening to this show but never checking out Another Pass, that's a surprise. You should check that out. it's the one that I've been doing for a really long time and is not quite so niche a topic. But anyway, aside from that, you can find me on the Blue Ski. You can find me on all the other @base symbol platforms. And then you should circle back for our next episode. But until then, stay super, man.
Men of Steel is a certain POV production. Our hosts are Jmike Folson and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Sophia Ricciardi. Our logo is by Chris Batista, and episode art is by Case Aiken. Our theme is by Geoff Moonen.
Hey, Nerf herders.
You sure you want to go with that?
Hey, everyone.
There we go. More inviting.
Have you ever had a movie that you really wanted to love, but something holds you back?
Or one that you did love in spite of a flaw?
Well, I'm Case Aiken.
And I'm Sam Alisea.
And on Another Pass, we sit down with cool guests to look at movies that we find fascinating.
But flawed.
And we try to imagine what could have been done when they were made to give them that little push.
We're not experts. We just believe in criticism.
Constructive criticism.
Sure.
So come take another pass at some movies with us.
And every now and then, we can celebrate movies that did it on their own, too.
You can find us at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Pass it on.
CPOV.
certainpov.com.